Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on December the 6th, 2007. Newcomers, look into the website cuttingthroughthematrix.com. We can download to your heart's content a lot of very displeasing stuff about the reality that we live in, the reality that's hidden, and you're given the illusion to replace it by the media and your education. And also look into Alan Watt's Sentinel.eu for transcripts of all the shows which are in the different, the various cities of Europe. And pass them around to your friends, because that's how the things spread. It's mainly through people passing things on to other people. Even though we have this internet, this big net here, it's still controlled by the big boys, and make sure you have thousands of diverse and fantastic voyages to fill your mind. You'll find that you'll change more people by direct contact than any other means. And that's what we're living in. It's a world of incredible indoctrination, because the understanding of how humans behave and how you can actually give them a reality was understood thousands of years ago. And that used to be what the priests did for pharaohs. Young pharaohs were brought into the mysteries. And the mysteries really, under many allegories that fascinated the people beneath them, the mysteries were really about control and how to control vast populations of slaves, basically, from the top to the bottom, by giving them another reality, a reality based on religion and a fear of what happens after this life. And so if you didn't behave yourself, that big eye of Ra that would know your every thought, every nasty little thought that you had, you might go around in circles forever, sort of born again and again and again, over and over and over. And they say that hell is repetition. And I think they're right. Who would want that over and over and over again? So they controlled thousands and millions of people over many, many centuries, right up to the present day. And now science is taken over from religion, science, with this big friend, the media. You always have scribes to go with the religious priests, and the priests now are the scientists and the white coats and the experts, and the media are the scribes that write it all out for you and fool you once again. That's why the theories in science at the bottom level for the public keep changing. Every few years they give you a brand new theory that contradicts the last theory that was taught as the gospel truth. But on the higher levels of science, of course, they know what is fact and what is empirical evidence, because they've tested over and over and over again. But for the bottom level, they give us theories, and that fills our minds, and we chat about these theories to our friends, and we all debate the theories. Now, a theory is just a good guess. Yet people come out with little Masonic caps on and their capes on, with a little diploma in their hands from colleges and universities, and they pass their degrees, the degrees of this occult system, by repeating theories, parroting theories, which obviously, if a new theory comes along, then the ones who passed last year on false theories should all be disrobed, basically, shouldn't they? Doesn't happen in the world of theories. But at the top, yes, they certainly do know what they're doing. Now, every movement, every major move we've ever seen, which is approved from the top, always, like Plato said, you can't allow grassroots organizations to form. If they do, you must get rid of them, because they could have unforeseen ripple effects on this planned society that you're bringing in and you're controlling. Therefore, all major events that happen in societal structure must be approved and implemented from the top down. And that's how it works today. Now, the huge environmental organization today that most people have been brainwashed into believing just came from people who were around doors with little tin cans collecting money to save trees and so on. These big organizations that are highly funded by the big institutions, which are just a front for the big wealthy families that run the world. They started up this environmental system to make us all think we're killing off the planet. And you look at the people who run and founded these big institutes like the Rockefellers, that plowed up more ground than anyone else to get oil, Standard Oil of New York. And now it's split up in many other companies, but they still control them under different names. And these are the same guys that fund the other side, the environmental movements. The biggest contributions come from these particular institutions that still are involved in massive big business. I mean, we jump back in time into Adam Weishaupt and other authors, even later with Albert Pike, the Pope of Freemasonry, who talked about bringing in big institutions that would be so wealthy they would become masters over the masters of the world, and they would direct the policies on it. And remember that both these characters belonged to an organization with many, many faces. Like ancient Egypt, Isis was the goddess with 1,000 faces. Everything you looked at really was a sect of the same religion, given different names to confuse the public. And that's exactly how it is today, too. These big institutions, these interlocking institutions that often have the same CEOs, chair hopping from one chair to the other chair in other institutions, and go around in circles. These big institutions plan with think tanks the direction of the world. And it is the Royal Institute for International Affairs. These characters are already working with other think tanks on the whole future of food and who will control the food supply of the world and what kind of food they'll give the peasantry, because they always tamper with food to keep us nice and dumb and stupid, and they have for thousands of years. So these institutions are interlocked also with what you think of as MI6 and the CIA and royalty. They're all completely interlocked, like this illusion that everything is somehow independent from everything else. Yet they all work together, always planning and implementing the future, bringing it into the present and going ahead. And that's why we're the last to know in this world, the absolute last to know of what's actually happening. Most things are already happened when we find out about them. It's like the NAFTA highway that's going past my place up here, not too far away. It was never discussed in any newspapers. They just started building it. And it's a war priority, meaning they clear the snow. This is Canada. You get lots of snow up here. They clear the snow in order to keep working every day, 7 days a week, summer and winter. It's a priority. And we'll know eventually when it's all built, and then they'll have a little debate if should they build it in Ottawa. Should they build it? And it's already done. That's how things actually happen in the real world. It's like NASA. After all the science fiction we have, we never question the billions of dollars given to the taxpayer, or even what it stands for, or why it's even so important. We think it's for space exploration. Like that's a very important priority or something. Look at the mess of this world right here. So we're always given this fake reality. And back in the 80s and the 90s, Mr. Maurice Strong, that works for these big foundations and the United Nations, you always find them all interlocking, was picked up by old Rockefeller and trained. And he's done his rounds. He was even the head of the World Bank at one time. He was the man they even sent into Ontario, a huge province, a big state of Ontario. They sent him in here, made him the CEO of that, and he started up the privatization process to sell it off to their buddies for peanuts after the taxpayer had built it up after many, many years. Then he went back to the United Nations after that. So these characters are all over, very busy and then tired. They never put their feet up and go fishing and collect their pension. They keep going into their 90s, putting in 12 to 16 hours a day sometimes. Quite amazing. Dedication. There you go, dedication. But Maurice Strong at the Earth Summit was the guy who was asked. He was asked about all the rights of animals for the Biodiversity Treaty. A big Biodiversity Treaty was signed on everyone's behalf, and you didn't even know about it. And it gave rights to all the animals, all the insects, and all the trees, and everything that blew and all the rest of it through the air, but it didn't give any rights for humans. And someone asked Mr. Maurice Strong, said, what about humans? Where do we fit into this? And he looked at this person scoldingly and said, the time we're finished, you'll wish you had the same rights as a tree. that was Mr. Maurice Strong. This great unelected person who always gets top positions advising governments and institutions in the United Nations and so on. And that's the real world, a combination, a big gang with many faces, all interlocked together, always planning your future. And that's what George Orwell tried to tell us about. And the big environmental movement is the way they're going to take all your property from you, change the old system, and make way for all that is new. That's what they say by the big builders, the big high masons, not the little guy at the bottom. But they're going to make a brand new world, a world where the peasantry, as they eliminate and cut down the population of the peasantry, generation by generation, we hope. Not that they won't be killed off at all, but at least they won't do it all at once. Then they're going to bring us all into these habitat areas, Agenda 21. The 21st century. It's called Agenda 21 by the United Nations, where there'll be no private property, be no private vehicles. That's why they haven't given you all the other technology that they've been yapping about and shown us for the last 50 years. It was never intended that you have a mobile population in the brave new world, which they're bringing up. And in this controlled environment, this controlled type city where you'll be overcrowded, all living on top of each other for a while, well, of course, the bureaucracy, the high bureaucracy, will live like they did in the Politburo, in the Soviet system, the big dash house in the country, and maid servants and butlers and all that kind of stuff. And that's going to be how it's going to be. And it's all planned that way. And you can look into the United Nations and look for their conservation areas of the future, the ones in the near future too, not far, far away. And they've all different colors on the maps to show you where habitat areas will be, where animal corridors will be, and all this kind of thing. But what are the means, what are the methods they're using to bring this about? And the methods mainly are something they don't talk about because they don't want you knowing about it. And that's weather warfare. They must convince you that you are a problem. You are causing global warming. Yes, you with your cigarette and your match there. Or you who light your little stove to keep alive. You're the problem. And they're going to convince you through massive propaganda and a few thousand scientists that are all in the payroll of the United Nations. They live on grants, by the way. That's why they can always find the right scientists to say the right things when they want them. And convince and educate the children from kindergarten on. It's already been happening. We're the problem, and we have to change our ways. And they're going to tell us how we're going to change our ways because it's all planned. But in the meantime, we must go through the fiasco of watching the taxation go up and up and up for property and so on. And we've already got the United Nations organization with members in every country to go around houses and domestic homes and so on and check to see if you're up to the building codes. And if you're not up to the building codes, they're going to fine you thousands of dollars per day, so that you'll get out of that home because they don't want you living in the country anymore. That's been going on now for a few years. And I'm going to read a little article shortly about this. We don't really care what happens to other people till it happens to us. That's something else they understand at the top. They understand this process very, very well. It's the old thing. The wolves come in and encircle the pack, the herd, and then they come out and pick one out here and pick one there, and everyone else is trying to save their own skin. They don't want to see, they don't want to know, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, talk about pleasant things. Another thing that they encourage, and through all the New Age movement, don't look at the negatives. Turn away from them, turn your back on, and plug your ears and close your eyes and think nice thoughts, and they'll tell you what the nice thoughts are. That's all part of the whole process of indoctrination. Yep, the whole New Age movement, the environmental movement, is really intertwined. And it was dreamed up a long, long time ago by the guys at the top, the advisors to those who pretty well own the world, since they own the governmental systems and they own the money supply entire planet. And they convinced us all that we need it. That's a simple trick. Money. We need money. We don't need food or anything. No, we get money to get food. And we spend a good part of our lives in school training to earn money, not to grow food or how to or anything else or raise animals. No, we're taught to get money. Because with money, as Karl Marx said, and then Lenin followed it, and they were all trained by the best bankers, they said they can tax it back from you. Taxation is just your labor in another form, going back to those at the top. And they use that coinage to hire more laborers and scientists to control you. And for a day that's been heavy with work, getting wood and all the rest of it, and going through all this snow, I seem to be kind of warming up now. And I should mention before I go on to this article, before I take callers, that those who want to keep me going, they can buy my books, my CDs, and videos on my website, cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and that keeps me going. That's the only income, really, that keeps all this together. I don't get paid for being on shows. I don't ask for money to be on shows. And I could go with sponsors and all the rest of it and give you ads. And the ads really that's all it'd be. I'd bring on guests and I'd be plugging ads for them, and I don't want to do that, to be honest with you. However, we do need folk to buy what these advertisers are doing, because otherwise there's no shows. And that's the bind we're in. We're all compromised to some extent in this system of what they call interdependence, where everything runs on this odd commodity called money. That's what it's current, is currency. It's like a current that flows through society, and it runs the system. An old trick that goes back thousands of years, and then they coined it in 800 BC for the first time. Saved them from carrying big bags of it around and dust and nuggets. And this is about the environmental movement I'm talking about. And it's something that struck me when I was remembering. I was loading this wood today, and I have all these odd thoughts that pop through my mind. And Lenin talked about a time that would come in the West. Remember, as I say, this man took over the world revolutionary movement that was from Mazzini, Giuseppe Mazzini. Mazzini took over the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry from Albert Pike. He was trained by Pike to be a world revolutionary. And he did go over to Italy, and he led a big sect of it over there for a time. And Mazzini actually authorized the creation of the mafia. But it was all connected with Freemasonry, which again goes back to England or London, where all Freemasonic movements are registered. They all get their little registration there, and they're authorized, their little charter to exist. It doesn't matter what name they go under, it all goes back to that place. So here you have the ones that control the world creating their own revolutionary to bring in a different system that people think is different from the old one. It's the same ones in charge of it. That's the con. And the environmental movement was to create a system where we give up everything, and go along with being controlled even more so. But Lenin talked about a time that would come in the West where there'd be so many layers and levels of bureaucracies and governmental departments, right down to all your different local departments and state, etc., that they'd be stepping on each other's toes. And when that happened, they'd be fighting over the people, really, because all their money comes from the public. We're the big herd, and everything grabs the money off you. That's what it's all about. You get fleeced. That's what Masons do. They wear little lambskin aprons because they fleece the sheep, you see. And the sheep's only purpose is to feed and clothe their masters. That's the purpose of sheep. Sheep are pretty dumb and stupid animals, and they all follow each other, even over a cliff, if it happens to be that way. And that's what they think of the public. Albert Pike himself said that the person who will not really take their own liberty and think for themselves is no more than meat on the table and a beast of burden by choice and consent. That's what they think of the general public, including the low-level Masons, because Pike didn't make any differentiation between those who went up the first 3 degrees and the general public. They were willing fools, basically. So here's an environmental movement that's kicking off in high gear, and it's weeding out little people here and there, and you don't care because, they haven't come for you yet. It's happening all over the place, and this is from the Los Angeles Times on the 27th of November, 2007. It's called, it's by Steve Lopez, Out on a Limb Over Trimming Fiasco. Listen to this. Everybody's got a horror story about a bureaucratic nightmare, but if you can top this one, call me Colette at your earliest convenience. Anne Collard was 7 months pregnant with her third child in June when an abatement notice came from the Glendale Fire Department. She and her husband, Mike, were ordered to clear some foliage and maintain 5 feet of vertical clearance between roof surface and overhanging portions of trees. The Collards knew their oaks and sycamores needed a trim, and so they talked to neighbors, did a little research, and called a recommended tree trimmer based in Orange County. For $3,000, the guy said, he'd remove about 15% of the foliage, and they'd be in the clear. The Collards asked if a permit was necessary. Not at all, said the licensed trimmer, who told the Collards he'd done lots of work in Glendale, and he probably had, probably for the mayor and all the bigwigs and the ones that give you all these abatements, etc. On the third day of the 3-day job, the city's urban forester happened to be in the neighborhood and noticed a tree trimmer doing this thing. She saw what was happening and said, "Stop, cease and desist," says Mike, a work-at-home software and computer guy. Glendale has an indigenous tree protection ordinance that dates to the 1980s, with an act to discourage developers and homeowners from bulldozing or hacking trees willy-nilly. Earlier this year, because of citizen complaints that native trees were still being ruined, the city approved more restrictions and bigger fines. This actually is coming all from the United Nations, by the way. They don't mention it in this article. None of which the Collards knew about. They now admit that they had read the fire department notice. If more closely, if they had, they would have seen in small print that a free permit was required to trim oak and sycamore branches larger than 1 inch in diameter, but it was an understandable oversight. A week after the first visit, the urban forester was back, telling the Collards that an arborist would come by soon to assess the damage. No, I'll skip on ahead here. The fact is they got a massive fine levied on them. A massive fine. $347,600. How's that? How's that for being a good citizen, eh? And they know darn well no one can afford this stuff. But this is where Mr. Maurice Strong and the Earth Summit and all of this big charade on the environment is to persecute the ordinary people. And one day we'll be into little rental accommodation. The whole world's going to rental only. That way you can get penalized. And authors have written about that from the big institutes. The government will eventually give you credits instead of money. And that way they'll keep you in line. If you're antisocial or you don't go along with all the rules and regulations, your money or your credits will be cut off. You won't get your allocated credits for the week. You can't save them up. That was Bertrand Russell that talked about that. You'll simply start with the same amount every week. So here you have this kind of stuff happening with the Collards, and that's from Melissa in California. Now, this is happening all over the place. A farmer not too long ago, and I think he was in Arizona, got a tap on the door, and he had a damaged gutter coming down from his roof. Now, it hardly rains there, so I don't know what the problem was, but a dented gutter, they were going to charge him $5,000 and $1,000 a day till he got it fixed. This is the farce that we're living in, the utter farce. To all the greenies, that's why they created the Green Party, by the way, is to take over eventually from the blue and the red. These are all colors of Masonic lodges and systems. That's all it is. That's what you're living amongst, and they'll give you the tie to go, the tie that binds, by the way, to go with each party. These are all colors of Masonic systems. So the green one is to take over from the blue or the red, you see. The red is always Labour, and the blue one is always Conservative. And the green one is the one that's taken over. And we all love green. It's a nice color. It's nature's color, and that's what they're using. The whole environmental movement, plus weather warfare, to convince you that you're the problem. You've got to change your little old ways. I'll be back with more after these messages. I'm Alan Watt, and we're cutting through the matrix. Like that song says, it can't go on, this code of silence. And for those who have woken up and notice that the king has no clothes, for all the general public are all standing in awe of this king, we have to speak out now, because the time is coming very quickly where we'll have to become very politically correct, where the CIA will be ordering the Patriot stations, what are safe topics, and you'll be back into politics and religion and all this kind of stuff before you know it. And that will come. That will come, because this bill is already passed in Congress that were actually drafted up by the Pentagon to stop people from saying their piece on the radio unless it's authorized. And they're going over talk show hosts' comments to see if they've ever advocated violence against the government, or you'll be whipped off to Guantanamo Bay and given your routine over there and reconditioned and set free and come back like a robot and probably go up and vote for people. I mean, that shows you've lost your head. Now, I think we've got Rick here. Rick was on the line. Are you still there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me, Alan?
Yeah, you're in California, eh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How are you doing? How's the winter treating you up there?
The winter came in rather heavily. It was getting 8 inches per day, roughly, of snow. And then I had to haul a bunch of wood up. I've got another pallet to get tomorrow. And I just finished and ate and fed the dog before I came on the radio. So it's coming in and not leaving me much time for anything. But that's the way my life's been for the last few years.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up I want to tell you about a little bit what's happening in my life lately.
Mm-hmm.
I have been having long conversations about the global policy with this Mexican friend of mine, mm-hmm. and he's he's listened to you, but he has decided to go with Marxism, with
mm-hmm.
Socialist. And I've been trying to convince him, tell him that Marx was for a lot of this stuff that's going on. But he brought an article to me from La Prensa, and it was saying that in January 2008, the final effects of NAFTA are going to go through, and Archer Daniel Midland in Cargill went down to Mexico and took over all the corn production. Yeah. And are using it for biofuel. And
yeah, they've already set up Chile, and before that, they've done that over the last 10 years to do the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and he said that, and the article said that what they've done is they've held reserves of corn and held back from the people, and they've created artificial scarcity, and they've driven up the price of corn really, really high. And it's called the tortilla crisis. And
it's all modified stuff they brought in, too. I know that they tried to keep all the modified stuff out of Latin American countries, and Monsanto, through various means, and I think they even dropped stuff from planes to seed the fields. They've got it in there now, yeah. Uh-huh.
And that's why a lot of people are coming over here, because they can't survive down there. They're forced out of their country, essentially.
Sure they are, and it's in cahoots. This is the whole thing with the big foundations in the U.S. I mean, people don't realize that Rockefeller Foundation and the other ones, Ford, Carnegie, and so on, and I think even Rockefeller runs the Carnegie Institute now. It's the same bunch at the top that run that other institution. They fund most movements in Mexico. I don't know if you realize that, including the ones that think they're fighting for independence. Yeah, they fund all sides. Uh-huh.
Yeah, because I've already talked about the Patriot radio shows bashing Mexicans, but then on the other side, I seem to hear a lot of Mexicans and a lot of other people are falling for Marxism. They're falling for Lenin.
It's the dialectic. Yeah, they gave us a dialectic. And see, capitalism is just the head side of the coin. And then you have the flip side, the tail side of the coin, and that's what they give the public. You always get it in the rear, you see. And so they tell you all the things they tell you all the things that the working person knows and can see for themselves, and promise you a utopia. And it's exactly like George Orwell said, some are more equal than others in such utopias. And we saw that in the Soviet Union, where those who worked for the system, the Politburo and all their relatives and dependents, they lived a good comparable life with the West, the same standard of living, where the people really at the bottom got all the junky houses and so on. So it's a big con game. And we know even the big banks, the whole thing with communism was they told the people that the government would run the money system. But that wasn't true. They allowed independent banks on the condition they made no money off the labor of people. Now, you know what lawyers do with a term like that, don't you? Mm-hmm. There's a billion ways around it. And at the end, when the wall came down and they said, oh, gee, we just can't run this anymore, remembering, too, that Lenin says this dictatorship will only last about 70 years. He knew the whole schedule. And sure enough, I think it was Mr. Solomon ended up, it was in the British papers, the Daily Mail, he left the Soviet Union, or the ex-Soviet Union, at the end with billions and billions of dollars worth of the money that the big banks had collected during that entire Soviet era, and went off to join, it said, his relative, the Rothschilds in London. Isn't that something? So you're always conned. Yeah, you're always conned, but they're very, very good at telling you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And what you understand, you know.
Yeah. I have another question. It's unrelated to this.
Yeah.
But you were talking about the Apple and the Windows sort of being, and they're like a dialectic, you know, either Mac or PC. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, what do you think of Linux? Is that a sort of a third way, kind of?
It would have to be. I know people who use a Linux system, mm-hmm. who, once they get used to it, familiarized with it, swear by it. But it's like cars to me, to be honest. What model car is the best? It makes no difference to me.
Yeah.
We're all in one. It's still called the net. You're on the net, or you're in the net, whether you like it or not, or you're stuck on the web, like a fly on a spider's web. It's a system that was a must-be, and back in the 70s and 80s, we had Brzezinski and others talking about this coming system that everyone would have to get on, and it was going to change the world, revolutionize the world, is what they said. Now, these guys, when they say revolution, they mean it, because they run all revolutions, including the physical ones, the sexual ones, the gender ones, and all the other ones in between. They run all revolutions, which are cultural revolutions, and this was part of their system to get the whole world stuck on their web in order to control you, basically, and have data collection on every single person on the planet.
Yeah, I read an article in Atlantic Monthly from 1945 by a man named Vannevar Bush, who ran all of the U.S. Weapons development during World War II, and he got into computers, and he started talking about, in the future, like a web, an encyclopedia that you could pull down, and a friend of mine mentioned an old 50s advertisement of a man at a stereo with a monitor. It looked like a stereo, but it had a monitor, and it had a pair of jeans in it, and it said you can shop for jeans.
Yes.
Like it was online.
World War II, they had newscasts that were shown over in the movie houses, the cinemas. And there was a report, it was just after D-Day, and one of the main reporters from the U.S. that went in with the troops was showing all these pictures of the troops running up beaches and all the rest of it. It says, you'll never guess how this is being relayed and transmitted. And another camera pans into him, and he's got this little cell phone in his hand with a little camera on it and a little screen on it, And he said, this is being put live, this has been directed live to the United States. It says, shortly everyone will have one of these in their home. And of course, we never saw it for another 40 years.
This is okay. So, can I download that or get that somewhere online? Is that available? That clip? I would like to see that.
You'd have to search for a really good search very quickly too. Now that I've said it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Alan.
It's a pleasure.
You have a nice day.
You too. We're kept in the dark with real technology. And I can remember the old movies they'd show you with government departments with these massive machines and reel-to-reel tapes going in. And this was the big computers. They were way beyond that at the higher levels, way beyond it. They had solid-state circuitry, at least in the 1950s, with microcircuitry, before we were even given the transistor radio, which was another step still to come. Before the solid state, they had all this stuff at very high levels of the CIA, MI6, and all the rest of it. And that's how you keep control of power over power. You never share all of what you have with the general public. Alan Watt, back when you were sleeping. We're all sleeping. The whole world's asleep. And we've been sleeping for an awful long time. And most people haven't a clue what's really going on or what's real anymore. Part of the problem is that they're overloaded their entire life with worry and stress and the training to get up there and compete for a living with other people, competition, and to be successful. Success means you're supposed to reach a stage where you've eliminated all the competition, you've got to the top. And very few ever do that, except the psychopaths. They have the natural ability because they have no conscience. They don't worry about all the nasty things they've done. And they live on ego. They are pure egotistical personalities. Therefore, they can always rationalize insane things. They'll rationalize anything to keep their own ego intact. So that's the system we're born and brought up into. And to top all that off, we have a psychopathic culture given to us, which is anything but humane. It's anti-humane. We're not humane to each other. We're not allowed really to be humane to each other in the system where we're all worried about getting kicked out in the street or arrested by cops because you've got a bit of rust on your car or whatever it might be, or the latest law that you've broken you didn't know existed because they keep churning out laws all the time. That's, again, how the Soviet system was. That's so that if ever they want you, you don't know it. You're breaking about 5 to 10 laws per day. And if they do want you, they can pick you up on one of them. That's why they put all these laws out there. But the other part, too, is to keep you in stress and fear and always buying the newest vehicle and so on, trying to comply, until you're like a hamster on speed in a treadmill. That little wheel is on, and you're just running in the same spot, and you can't keep up. And then you give a class system of those who are better at competing than other people, so that the middle classes don't care what happens to those down below them. They think they've made it somehow, and all these laws, all the cost increases won't affect them the same way until it does hit them, and then they start howling to the guys above them. That's how everyone's separated in the system. Then you add to it the gender wars that they've added to it as well, and the intergenerational wars where everybody's segregated from every other generation, which is nothing like it used to be, you know. I mean, people used to even dress the same way. The multitude of people would even dress the same way for generations. There was no such thing as fashion for the massive peasantry that happened before the Industrial Revolution. And so everyone's fighting everyone else and pretending they don't belong to the same human race as everyone else, and somehow they're special until it hits them as well. And then they start howling and squealing and demanding to know what's been happening. Well, that's the problem. You have to be awake to know what's happening, and you have to use the gray matter that's in between your ears. That's what it's for, and you must start using memory, your own memory. That was a trick that was found out thousands of years ago and discussed by Greek philosophers when they bemoaned the fact that writing was becoming prevalent amongst even their own class, because at one time you used to hire someone to write letters for you and communicate for you. That's what kings and queens of England even did for up until the last couple of centuries ago. And so in ancient Greece, they were bemoaning the fact that more people were learning to read and write, and that would make them not use their memory so much, because before that, people had to learn in school how to memorize things, their history as well. And they could recite history. And then if you go into the European countries and even Scotland and Ireland, you found that the tribal systems they had there had bards. And the bard was brought up as a child. He was picked for his abilities and trained. And he could recite the history, centuries of history, oral history, in poetry and rhyme, and sometimes in song as well. Fantastic abilities. And we're capable of that. See, we're capable of that. But with everyone getting a basic education, that's why they call it basic education. We're given a basic education, not the true education, but the basic one, so as we can operate the system for those that own it. We're not given the higher meanings of truth or anything like that. But we're also overloaded with data and trivia. That's what most media lives on, is trivia. They give you lots of trivia and data to fill your head. And the rest of it is generally programming. It's predictive programming, stories where it's meant to have an impact, a psychological impact. when something they want you to do or mimic or copy or a trend they want to start, they couple it with emotive reasons and they hit it with emotive punches into your mind and it becomes imprinted. And then you see it happening in your lifetime, a new trend in society, the way things are going, and you accept it quite passively, thinking it's quite natural. This is how it's done. And we've all been brought up in this system. Every country is the same. And the last few countries that haven't gone along with the standardization process, and don't ever kid yourself that the United Nations that hides behind its eternal propaganda of bringing the world together with its diversities, don't ever believe that for a minute, because it was decided 200-odd years ago and written about by big economists in London that they wouldn't allow no other system or culture to coexist. And so they're finishing off those countries that will not go along and become standardized into the new system. They must get rid of those things that impede their so-called progress. And I've never heard anyone come out and define to the public what progress is. Whose definition of progress does it happen to be? Because it's never given. It's never given. And of course it's never given because they don't want you to know the real truth. Someone's defined what, it's like when Bush came out with the new freedom. And everyone sort of, in one ear and out the other as usual, just more data. But he was giving you a legal statement. He's a president who's telling you that freedom has been redefined. You better listen to that and understand what he's telling you. And so far, I don't think anyone who heard it has asked for the definition of the new freedom from the president or the guys that write all his scripts for him, the same guys that work for Hollywood. Because that's who they hire. They hire script writers. They should demand to know what he means by the new freedom. That's an official statement. It's like the New Deal. The New Deal meant the throwing out of the old constitutional values and laws and rules. Here's the New Deal. That was a legal statement of a new system. And it goes in people's ears and out the other. Sad, isn't it? Sad how things happen. They're told legally something and it doesn't even register. Because they've been trained not to think for themselves. They've been trained, the media, like Brzezinski said, the media is there to do all their thinking, their reasoning for them. So that it doesn't occur to them to ask the question, well, what does that mean? Define it. They truly believe the media is there to do the reasoning for them. These altruistic guys on the television that come on at 6 p.m., then 11 p.m. when you're in a somnambulistic state, that's why they have it on late at night. You're addicted to fear, terror, or you might miss some law that's going to affect you tomorrow. That's why you stay up to watch the news. 11 p.m., when you're somnambulistic, the scientists discussed this back in the 50s. How to train the public, train them to alter their behavior. It's called behavior modification, and make them stay up later and watch late-night news. And once you do that, you download it very, very easily because the sensor part of your brain is fast asleep. And everything you've been told becomes the gospel truth. And there's that guy that you've grown up with. He's tottering on his feet. They keep him employed because you've grown up with him. He's about 80 years of age. And would Big Daddy lie to you? Of course he wouldn't. He stares at your face every night from that screen while he's reading the dummy board that you don't see. He's an actor. An actor who speaks with the voice of authority. In ancient Rome, they hired professional orators. So you'll see all these speeches that the different emperors gave, but they didn't actually give them. They just sat there, and the orator would get up there, professional orator, and do the hand waving and the gestures all practiced, and speak in a very, very well-trained voice, and read the script on behalf of the emperor. Nothing really has changed, but the puppets have to do it themselves. They have to read it themselves. So they come on television and read what some script writer has written for them. Some of the script writers for your president of the U.S. were born and brought up in Canada.